module, we're going to discuss the issue of Bitcoin and cryptocurrency and discuss the digital assets that are very popular these days. This is being recorded in the middle of August 2020, and some late-breaking developments that we'll be able to share regarding some really important enforcement actions against some terrorism-related cryptocurrency and Bitcoin scams. But this presentation should give you a good overview of what it is, what some of the terminology is, and what some of the hopefully cut through the hype and really get to the meat of this important revolutionary financial technology. So obviously the world has changed, and we all know that so much is digital in our world today. The digital landscape, the cryptocurrency landscape, is really new, but also very old. And if you think about it, if you really kind of break it down, it is very technologically centric. It uses new language and terms, which means you may need a translator. You may need to have a guide. It is decentralized, which means there is often a lack of authoritative sources, and it's constantly changing and evolving. There is some transparency, so you can see that, but again, just because it's transparent doesn't mean that it's easy necessarily. It's a constantly changing landscape. But I think at the end of the day, if you get nothing else from this presentation, understand that cryptocurrency at its very basic is people sending things of value through digital means to other people. It's as simple as that, and that is an important concept in and of itself. So let's start with definitions. Let's start with virtual currency. Virtual currency is a digital asset. It is a medium of exchange that operates like any fiat or government issued currency, but it does not have the attributes, the legal attributes of real currency, and that's really important. So it acts like a payment mechanism, or can act like a payment mechanism, but isn't issued by a government entity that has the legal authority to issue the currency, and it's not legal tender, so it's not accepted everywhere. Sometimes it's called convertible virtual currency, or CVC, as well. Cryptocurrency, also a digital asset. It is a medium of exchange using strong cryptography to secure the financial transactions, control the creation of additional units, and verify the transfer of assets. Same thing again, not legal tender, and almost all are decentralized. There's a lot of confusion behind these definitions, but one of the things that I think is really important is when you start to do an investigation, you really want to understand what is actually behind this thing. Okay, so let's talk about the blockchain. The blockchain is the underlying technology for most cryptocurrencies. It is secured by the algorithm, which is hence the reason it is cryptography. It's secure, or supposed to be. It is publicly available, open source. It's an open source technology, and it is distributed or decentralized. So you see in the chart there the ability for multiple nodes to verify the transactions. Don't rely on one or two or a few central nodes. Basically, the blockchain is a ledger. Think of it as a chronological list of all the transactions that went before it, and it's a puzzle piece in a way that enables you to verify the authenticity of it. it is append only, so there's no read write access to anything before the present transaction. So once it's written, it's done. There's no turning back. If you sent that money to the wrong address, you cannot get it back. The transactions are transparent, so you can see where money is going, and we'll look at some in a minute. But there's no real world identity with that, so you don't actually know who's on the other side of a transaction, unless that person has given you their Bitcoin address. That's not to say that you can't use open source information and other investigative techniques to work to unmask those, but it is challenging. Words do matter. They have meaning. This is one of those places that it is really important to have a good working understanding of the verbiage. And so I've listed 4 different glossaries here that are available online. The coinmarketcap.com is an excellent one. I highly recommend the Latham & Watkins book. Latham & Watkins is a very large law firm. Reuters obviously is a news organization, and I liked finder.com. I thought they had a very nice crypto glossary as well. So keep those handy, because they are really important, and it really can be helpful to understand what you're dealing with. So this is a framework that I put together because I think it's really important to understand where these fit in and what the future holds. And digital assets and cryptocurrency are part of a larger umbrella of technologies. Sometimes it's called fintech, financial technologies, that are all over the board. Everything from loans to you name it, transfer systems, all kinds of things. So this is part of a much larger innovation. But the virtual currencies themselves, I think, really are important to segregate out, because virtual currencies technically come in 4 different buckets. So the first one are these closed systems all the way on the left. They're very centralized, right? They are issued generally by a specific person or authority, but usually they have a very limited use in terms of they can only be used within that one system. So I like the idea of your Kohl's gift card or your Kohl's cash issues you a card. Well, Kohl's cash can only be earned at Kohl's. It can't be earned at Target or JCPenney or TJ Maxx or any of the other retail stores. It's that specific to that brand, that company. Your Metro card for riding the transit or MTA, all of those only work within that closed system. Then you also have these unilateral or open currencies, but are again very much tied to a centralized entity. So for example, the idea of Facebook credits or PayPal or Venmo, those are all open. You can use them, you can transfer them to people outside the system, but they're still issued by and controlled by, and centrally there's a central repository of records, all from whoever issues that. So maybe a lot more flexible, but again, you still have that ability to get specific data. Then we move into the true traditional kind of cryptocurrencies. So you have your open, bilateral, and these are both, and then closed bilateral, and these are again both built on the distributed ledger technology, or DLT, which is also commonly referred to as the blockchain. So under the open bilateral system, it's one of those things where you can send and receive. There are obviously the Bitcoin is the one most people are familiar with. There are altcoins or alternative to Bitcoins, and we'll talk about some of those. Litecoins, stable coins, forks. Again, all of these things are built on the blockchain. The closed bilateral ones, though, are different because you cannot see the blockchain. They are built on a blockchain, but they're private blockchains. So something like a privacy coin, once it goes into the privacy coin blockchain, only you have access to it. You don't see, you can't view that from an open website. Specialty tokens or securities, all of these things are considered closed bilateral. Then you also have this issue of decentralized apps, and we won't get into that. That's an emerging area, but again, it's something to be watching for as more and more application-driven processes come on. So if you think about a typical digital asset ecosystem and the participants, and we'll focus mainly on the cryptocurrency just to keep it simple. So in the center you have users, individuals, and sometimes businesses that are using say Bitcoin. So around them in that immediate grouping, you have your trading platforms, your wallet providers, your digital currency exchanges, and we'll get into all these soon. But you also have merchants, retailers, wallet providers, credit cards, issuers who are able to link it to a cryptocurrency account, and obviously software providers. On the left, you have these kind of infrastructure, or I shouldn't say, I'm sorry, on the left you have these very interesting other groups that are very, very significant in that this is what they do. So you have mining operations, kiosks or ATMs, Bitcoin ATMs you've probably seen or heard of. You have cryptocurrency and digital asset news platforms and services so that people can be able to keep on top of things. You have app developers and peer-to-peer trading platforms that enable people to meet up. You also have these on the bottom there, online communities, communications apps, social networks, and forums that all cater to this cryptocurrency or digital asset user and system. And on the right, you have the infrastructure, the ancillary services. So these are companies that are probably in the technology space, don't exclusively or primarily deal with cryptocurrency or digital assets, but are really integral to especially the technology piece of it. So certainly hosting, network storage providers, digital storage solutions, enterprise blockchains, consulting and legal, nonprofits and associations, and of course crowdfunding. So let's dive a little bit deeper and talk about digital asset exchanges and virtual currency exchanges. So these are two different but very important aspects. So a virtual currency exchange is basically exactly like you would go if you were going to France. So you board a flight in the US. Before you leave, you go to a little kiosk that has an exchange. You say, I'm going to France, and they say this is the current exchange rate for euros, and boom, you give your money, they make the transaction, and you're good to go. Same thing for virtual currencies, right? So these are the on-ramps, if you will, of the cryptocurrency space. And it's dollars for Bitcoins, dollars for Litecoins, Ethereum, whatever you want. But it's that usually that currency, fiat currency, government issued currency that is the opening. It can also do crypto to other crypto, so you could have multiple accounts within a virtual currency exchange. Most of these are foreign. Some of them are coming back to the US, but most of them are overseas, so that creates problems or issues. Digital asset exchange is basically, think of it like a stock exchange or day trading platform for securities. There's no regulated market. It's literally kind of trade on your own, almost like gambling. You can also invest in initial coin offerings, which are very high risk and problematic. Most of them are unregistered securities, and that constitutes potential for fraud. But because they're foreign based, they don't necessarily need to apply or don't comply with US law. So these are two very interesting, very evolving spaces, and obviously the regulatory environment is changing every day. So when you look at cryptocurrency users, they're kind of differentiate between probably 2 to 3 of these. I dare say the biggest, probably the most common one is called the light user. So the individual who's simply buying, selling, using cryptocurrency on their mobile devices with some level of frequency. Then you have your traders, who are probably more into the digital asset exchange work. Very high risk, obviously. The full node, these are probably long-time users, because the Bitcoin's core software really no longer can support this. It used to be that in order to get Bitcoin, you had to use the core software, open source software. At some point, the cryptocurrency became so popular, and it just wasn't feasible for an individual with a regular laptop or desktop to be a full node. So if you see a full node, somebody who's a full node, then they're probably an early adopter. Solo miners may have mining devices, and I believe I hopefully have a picture of one of those. If not, it's a small integrated circuit unit that basically does nothing but do the computations. And you can buy them for a couple $100 and put them in your basement and try to earn extra money that way. And then you also have obviously your very large server farms to do industrial mining, and quite frankly, that's where most of the space has gone. So again, let's kind of really drill down into the Bitcoin and cryptocurrency specifically. Cryptocurrency does function like money, but isn't. It doesn't exist in physical form. It's really only the ones and zeros. The value is just created by the community and depends on the supply and demand. The value is very unstable. It's very volatile. It does not have any government or central bank backing. And quite frankly, it's still in its infancy. Even with the tremendous growth over the last couple of years, it's still very sporadic. So again, it can be used to purchase goods or services if it's accepted, but it is not legal tender. It does measure value, so there is a ability to correlate the value of the cryptocurrency with the value of other commodities or other assets, just like money. You can obtain cryptocurrency. Most people will either buy it from a virtual currency exchange or buy it with a credit card, and those are the two most common ways. Again, you can convert one cryptocurrency to another. You can meet up in person and hand over a fistful of cash and get a get a Bitcoin on your phone or piece of paper, whatever it may be. But most people will buy it from a virtual currency exchange. So this is the little mining devices that I was just talking about. Obviously, the mining is the piece of the blockchain that essentially enables the whole system to work. I'm not going to go through it with much detail, but basically it's this idea of a very complex math problem, and it's a way to ensure that the transactions are valid, so they're kind of always chopping on things. And now obviously it's mostly on server farms. So again, virtual currency exchanges, again, on-ramp, you can exchange fiat currency for cryptocurrency or virtual currency, and it can also be funded by wire transfers, bank transfers, credit cards, PayPal, Square, and Cash App now all have very significant cryptocurrency inroads, so those are big. That's a big deal. US-based virtual currency exchanges, for example, Coinbase and Bittrex, are regulated by the Treasury Department, the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. They are required to have anti-money laundering requirements, record keeping, know your customer, and due diligence. But unfortunately, many of them are also located in very unsavory jurisdictions, or jurisdictions that do not have the legal infrastructure to handle a lot of these. Talking about wallets, wallets are really important because they are the applications that enable you to use them. There are computer-based wallet applications or software. Many people use them on a mobile device, which is called the thin client. There are also other custodial-based accounts, and we'll talk about USB and thumb drives, which is called cold storage because it's not connected to the internet. If it was connected to the internet, like a web-based or mobile app, it's called hot storage. I'll show you an example of a printed wallet and a QR code or quick response code. Again, those are very useful because these are very complicated, long letters, numbers, and you get one thing wrong, they're key sensitive, you're in trouble. And they also do recovery seeds, which are random words that enable the program to regenerate your private key, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So bitaddress.org is one place you can go to just create a wallet. Here you go. The address is on the left, the private key or the PIN code is on the right, and you share your Bitcoin address in order to get paid. You do not share your private key in order to access your funds. It's pretty simple. But again, you can see very complicated alphanumeric designators here. So you have the QR codes to make it a little bit easier. A lot of them will generate the web-based random private key pair. Again, your private key is, think of it as your PIN or your authentication code to actually get access to it, whereas your public key is basically your mailing address or your routing number so that they know which bank and account number to go to. But your private key is really the proof of ownership. That is how we know that you control that specific account. And usually it's one address per transaction to keep it simple and safe and secure. There are also these USB devices. So Trezor is one. This other one is a Samsung, and the bottom left, I believe, is Ledger Key, and that looks like a more traditional USB. But again, these are very popular. You can load them then take them out. Wallets can contain multiple addresses within them, so these are some examples. Your wallet ID is your kind of overarching one, and your addresses basically are essentially, think of it like you would a traditional wallet. You've got 6 different credit cards. These are essentially nameless credit cards. Bitcoin is the oldest. It was became operational in January of 2009. There was a peer-to-peer cash transfer idea in a white paper by a person called Satoshi Nakamoto. We don't believe that person exists. It's probably a consortium of people, but the idea was extreme privacy, being able to shield information from the government, primarily because the idea was we can't count on the banks. And if you think of when this is happening in 2008, the financial crisis, a lot of banks are going under, huge global financial instability, and so this was an idea to be able to kind of buck the system. The blockchain records all of the transactions but doesn't have the identities, and is very similar to this idea of bearer bonds that we've talked about in other classes, but possession being 9/10 of the law. If you possess the bearer or the bond, if you are the bearer of the bond, then you own that company or the shares in that company. Legitimate cryptocurrency uses, obviously buy, sell, trade. There are mining operations. You can use it as an investment or an asset to hopefully appreciate in value. Most people use it as novelty, quite frankly. No, I'm just kidding. It is really interesting to see the different uses that are out there. Of course, illicitly, you can hide assets. It's very easy. You can commit securities fraud. You can use, this is the preferred method of payment for dark web and darknet marketplaces. We'll touch on those. Offshore gambling is very popular with Bitcoin and cryptocurrency, as well as terror financing and mixing and tumbling. We can't get into the details of mixing and tumbling because it would take too long, but basically it's a way to obscure the payments in a way that is essentially indecipherable. So in February 2019, a designated terrorist group began publicizing their call for Bitcoin donations in order to assist jihad. And so obviously once that became known, a lot of people started perking up. This is an example of the blockchain, very small example, but you can see here this is the address that we just put in. Here you see that there were 52 total transactions involving about $6,169. So not a lot of value dollar-wise, but certainly a lot. And if you go, I believe it's 2 hops after this one, it's like $600,000. So there's a pretty significant jump. But again, you can see that all these people, have basically donated. These are additions, and they're pretty small. But you can pull off a pretty major terrorist attack in a third world country for probably about $1,000. I said we're recording this in mid-August 2020. Just yesterday, the Justice Department announced a massive arrest of 2 individuals, as well as the seizure of multiple Bitcoin accounts and taking down multiple Facebook pages relating to this scheme. This is an example of some of the tracing that was done in order to identify who actually had the Bitcoin and to be able to take control of it. So again, this just shows the complexity. You don't need to go deep into this, but all the material is online. It's a very, very good case. I happen to know some of the people who conducted the investigation, and just really, really remarkable. Largest takedown of terrorist-related assets so far. And again, here you see some of the screenshots that they included. They used social media, obviously very, very smart about that. Facebook and Twitter, YouTube. So again, they know what they're doing, and it's a quick, easy, and very secret way to, or so they thought, to get money for their terrorist operations. This is another interesting case. These are quotes from a individual who owned a company called Coin Services International, and undercover agents recording him saying things like, "Oh, Bitcoin travels well. You can take it anywhere, spend it anywhere you want. You don't have to report it. The government can't take it away from you." All these things. Not true, as he found out. Cryptocurrency laundering as a service. This is a really interesting case where there are investigations going on led by Europol to identify people who essentially were running crypto ATMs in order to help just launder money. So a very, very interesting case. I commend it to you. So we talked about privacy coins. I just want to go into these pretty quickly. Again, these are non-public blockchains. The transactions are hidden and wholly anonymous. And basically, when you start, you are jumping coins. So you go from Bitcoin to Dash or Bitcoin to Zcash, and you move off chain, and you cannot trace them. So they are really becoming very popular with criminals. So in May of 2019, the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, which has done a lot of work on this, put out an advisory on illicit activity involving virtual currencies, and the keys that they keyed up on were the idea of darknet markets, unregistered peer-to-peer exchangers, so people who were accepting money, generating Bitcoin and selling it. There are regulatory requirements, and people were not doing that. Obviously, terrorist financing we've talked about, sanctions evasion, and kiosks and ATMs and the record keeping issues there. So that's also a very, very good read, and they have a lot of red flags included in there as well. One of the things they also advised about information collection, and this is helpful because I think that as we do our investigations, especially on open source, this is one of those areas that you really, again, there's so much potential, and the more you can correlate them and piece together traditional and open source investigation techniques, the easier it is, and the more and the better information you will get. But information to collect include things like addresses, wallet addresses, bank and account information, transaction details, including the transaction hash or TXID, transaction ID. Obviously, any relevant transaction history, the login information, including IP addresses, mobile device information such as your IMEI, so how you, basically cell phone serial number, and then of course any open source information. Securing and safeguarding is vital in an investigation. So if you come across it, you really need to make sure that you have a good handle on what's going on and have the resources available to secure and ensure that the value isn't lost. So, are you looking at ongoing activity? Is the person being cooperative? Will they sign the Bitcoin over to a special agency account? What kind of information is known? Did they disclose it? Are they being really forthcoming? I mean, is it verifiable? Where is it? If it's in a Coinbase, like a virtual currency exchange in the US, heck of a lot easier to freeze those than it is if it's in an Asian virtual currency exchange. And then of course you want to know what the value is. So you need to be able to look at the blockchain and see what the going rate is. Again, you could have one wallet or multiple wallets. They could be different types of wallets. They could have different locations. They could be, you really want to see what the activity is, so you want to be able to get that data. And of course, there may be a lot of costs or options associated with recovery, so you really want to consider those as you're moving through these cases. If they're using a website, you want to get their account information. Usually this is by their email. That's what most virtual currency exchanges are tracking. Private keys, locations of those, locations of word recovery seeds, so they couldn't reconstitute it somewhere else as soon as you leave. All very important. And of course, what's the value? This is why records are so critical, and it's a very fact-specific, very detail-oriented. The courts are treating this in a variety of different ways. There are also tax implications, so you could have a tax fraud case potentially. There are fiduciary duties and reporting requirements if you're taking this over potentially. And again, it's very volatile, so you really want to know, where things stand. Are they, what's the value on the date of seizure? What are the transfers prior to, say, a search warrant? What are what's going on with it afterwards? This is not something you just kind of set it down and forget it and come back, a couple weeks later. You really have to pay very close attention in almost real time. So just want to close out. Again, we've seen this in a lot of these darknet marketplaces, and it's really something that is very popular, but it's a new and very interesting concept, and there's a lot that's happened, and no doubt a lot to come. So I hope this was a really good, quick, but hopefully interesting dive into the world of cryptocurrency and Bitcoin, and give you at least some sense of what's happening. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask them on the discussion board or shoot me an email, and we can get you in touch. And there are more resources available if you really want to do some deeper dives. Other than that, have a great night and take care.